Welcome everyone to the Analytic Mind podcast. Another great episode for you today. With me is Brett Cohen. So Brent is calling in from the US and has been a business intelligence leader for over 15 years now. And I think it's going to bring a lot of unique insight to how to think about the practical application of analytics within within organizations of any size. I think based on Brett's experience, there's a lot we can go into around how to use analytics to improve improve the key metrics within your business, your revenue, your cost, the optimizations, the operational optimizations that can be achieved. So Brett, why don't you give maybe a better background than what I've done, and just give the listeners a bit more insight into your expertise and the experience that you've gained over the last number of years that you've been working in this space.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the intro. And so I've been in the analytics space for about 15 years, really growing from the basic business analyst to more of a business intelligence, where I'm doing reporting and analytics, and then really going to the full end of data analytics, where you're not just doing the reporting and analytics, but also understanding the back end and what data you need and how to structure that data to best make those decisions, to best tell those stories that you want to tell. And one of the things that I've really seen in my time is how you bring the pieces together, right? How you bring the people, the process, and the technology together, right? You really have three main pillars that you really need to bring together in order to have a successful analytics group. And I have experience both in the private sector at companies like Verizon and Marriott, and as well as in the consulting space, where I've worked with a variety of clients to help bring them those sorts of analytics and business intelligence solutions. And one thing that I have seen is companies like to talk about how much they're investing in analytics, and we're a data-driven company, or we're a data-driven team. But what does that really mean? And sometimes the companies, you can see that, okay, we're going to hire a bunch of data scientists, a bunch of data analysts, a bunch of data engineers to really bring this company to the next level with their data. But then they may not invest in the proper technology to get those insights, or they may invest in that technology and invest in that people, but not really invest in the change management and the process to bring it all together. And you have a lot of investment in people and you have a lot of investment in technology, but you're really not getting any value out of it. So it's really about maximizing value, and value to different places means different things. Certain things, it means, how do we do this process faster? Other places it may be, how do we reduce the amount of complaints or from our stakeholders? How do we, and others, it's more straightforward, easily measurable, and say, how do we increase revenue? How do we reduce cost? How do we improve ROI, or improve a particular metric that's really driving the business?
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. And what I've really enjoyed about speaking to many people in the analytics space through this podcast is that we're really trying to drill into a framework around how to get that value, and that's something that I don't think is thought enough about. Everyone just sees the latest piece of technology and it's like, oh yeah, we start using this, then we're going to start building a data culture. And the reality is, I think there's got to be a more deeper framework embedded into how you approach things. And I think that you've touched upon some interesting ways to try and simplify that within an organization, or within your planning of your initiatives. And I think this is what we can really dive into today. So, I think on one side, there's probably three areas that you can focus on to improve things within an organization. You can try and increase your revenue in some way. You can try and decrease your cost. You can improve the efficiency of how you do things. But then to actually make that happen, you spoke about the people, process, and technology. So I think you've got to, it seems like, if you wanted to really simplify it down, which I think you've done, is that you've got to get those three: people, process, and technology, all working well together to either increase your revenue, decrease your costs, or improve your efficiency. So what do you sort of think about that?
I agree 100%. And I think the cheapest but toughest is the process, right? Because investing in people is expensive. Investing in technology is expensive. Changing a process doesn't really have, it just requires buy-in, but it's not necessarily a cost or I would say a tangible cost, right? You're not necessarily, or a big tangible cost, unless you hire folks who can really lead that change, and you need certain people to help bring that change on. But right, it's something that people tend to forget, and you can have, especially if you're investing in people or you're investing in technology, either or, you're going to need to bring potentially new people on or invest in training to get existing people up to speed on whatever that technology is, or new people who can work in that technology space in order to provide whatever solutions you're trying to implement. But changing the process and working through the culture shift from an organization, especially, I think this is easier in potentially in smaller or like the more startup type organizations where things are always rapidly changing. But when you're sitting at an existing organization, I've seen with some of my consulting clients, as well as some organizations where I've sat, that changing the way people do things, especially for people that have been embedded in this culture, embedded in these data analytics for the last 15 or 20 years, doing it this way, it's tough. And it goes both ways. I've seen it's top down and bottom up, and you need buy-in on both sides. For example, one of the things that really helped when I was at Verizon is we had an SVP in my organization, and he was really buying in on the analytics. And when we needed some additional investment in certain technology or in certain training to get our skills to that level, he was all in. And not only was he all in, he was also the one who was consuming the analytics and sharing that with the C-suite. And I think we made this was probably going back about 10 years, we made about a $20,000 investment in technology, which was a big investment for the team at the time. But that $20,000, I mean, he spoke to that many years later, because this was before software was being licensed. It was just one flat cost. And he's like, that's the best $20,000 I ever spent, because we were able to put all of our team's analytics on a single platform and not have to really worry about what's going on with the rest of the business. Because you had other analytics running from other areas of the business that sometimes would slow down our analytics, because we needed real-time data so we can make real-time decisions, and so we could track our business throughout the day, right? If there was something wrong at a given point during the day, is it a product issue? Is it a data issue? How do we get into remediation? How do we fix that issue? And how do we address and diagnose that issue? So we were able to build our analytics platform and put something up throughout the day and watch this tracker and say, okay, every few minutes, how's our business doing? Okay, something's not going well. And then breaking it down, saying what business line is being hurt. And we were able to see it, like I said, both from the bottom up and the people that are actually building the tools and analyzing the data, and from the top down, from the executives who are the end consumers of that data, and really enthusiastic about the results and buying into the methodology that we're implementing and we're selling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice. I like some of those examples that you gave. Now, what would be interesting to get your thoughts on is, I think a lot of us in the analytics space agree that there's almost this blue ocean of opportunity to create value from initiatives that you might be working on. But if you're an organization that is trying to, you've got all these opportunities to focus on, okay, how can we extract more revenue? How can we reduce our costs on things? How can we build better processes and be more operationally efficient? How do you assess all of these different opportunities in this blue ocean? And then how do you prioritize what you should focus on?
Right? I mean, it really comes down to a variety of factors. There's no cookie cutter way to do things. I would say, first off, it goes down to what the leadership says is the goals of the organization, right? So you go down to what are a year, or for a 5 year or 3 years, look at all these different initiatives and say, how do they align to these particular goals? And as we look at how those initiatives align to those goals, and we then set up prioritization, and then we also look at what the potential impact is, especially in consulting, right? When we're presenting different options, we talk about what's people want typically three things. We want something that's cheap, we want something that can be done fast, and we want something that's really good. And the mantra in consulting is you could usually get two of those three. You can get cheap and good, but not fast, cheap and fast, but not good, or fast and good, but not cheap, right? You can't get all three. Yeah. So it's really coming down to where the alignment is and what the potential impact is of these various initiatives, right? And sometimes, again, depending on the organization, the revenue initiatives or the cost cutting initiatives, right? Things that can increase revenue and reduce cost sometimes get higher priority over operational efficiency. The way to cut that out is assigning revenue and cost to operational efficiency, right? If there's a process that takes typically, say, 6 weeks to do in terms of man hours and 4 employees to do that, so 4 employees spending all of their time for 6 weeks is roughly X amount of man dollars, right? And then going back and saying, if we can cut this process from 6 weeks to 3 weeks, that means we can save X amount of dollars where those resources could then be used for other projects. So assigning value to operational efficiency is a way how to increase the likelihood that operational efficiencies can be included in addition to just revenue generating initiatives or cost savings initiatives, and really setting that priority. And sometimes the things that have the highest revenue impact or may take the longest to implement. So again, also looking at time and where those priorities fit in terms of a timeline. Are certain things essential? Are certain things nice to have? Are certain things that we can do that can help partially while also doing other things that can help different areas improve even more?
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, what comes to my mind when you were talking through that is almost like, if you're part of a strategy discussion around your analytics, you need to almost think like a venture capitalist. You need to think of all of the different opportunities that you have to create value from your data assets and from the initiatives that you that you work on around those assets, and you need to assess, okay, what would be my return on investment from pursuing this versus some other initiative. And once you lay all those out on the table, you could almost build sort of like a mind map of all of these opportunities. And then as a organization or with your executive team, you can assess, okay, well, this, yeah, you can assess the validity of your estimations around return on investment. And then that is what you should target. That is what you should pursue initially. And that's also how I think you can quantify the value generation. Ultimately, you can match it up against what your benchmark was for your return on investment versus what your, the actual benefit that eventuated. So, those are the sort of things that sort of started percolating in my mind when you were talking through that. And I think that, that is a nice way to build a strategic framework around how you approach analytics, analytics work and investment.
Yeah, and I would say you set goals around that so you can measure up against your goals, and I always say, I mean, you want to set realistic but also stretch goals, right? Because sometimes I've seen teams say, okay, we want to clean this piece up, and we're going to set a goal that's maybe 5% higher than where we were last year. But if you really do a thorough cleaning, you should be getting it somewhere between 20 and 30% higher. So you kind of set softball goals, and you're not really motivating the folks to really increase their efficiency, right? If something realistic, if you actually go in, you're either setting them up to like knock it out of the park so that they can look really good when they do that, or you're setting them up to say, okay, yeah, we did a little bit better. Here's success.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to set something that's realistic. And I've seen this even on like finance sides, right? You set something that's realistic, because sometimes you can set goals that are either too low or even sometimes on the opposite end too high. You can say, okay, we want this business, this is a new business, we're really going to focus on this business, and we want this business to make $5 million next year from this line of business. Yet we haven't done anything with this line of business yet, so we need to start it, and we have no idea. We just think that this business can make $5 million, and it's all well and good, but you don't have any basis in fact to say, here's where we're going to get there. Or you can say, okay, we can get to $5 million if we acquire this many customers, and we have this rate of engagement and this rate of conversion and this average cost or average revenue per user. And then, yeah, that's how we get to $5 million. But you're not hitting those because you've never run that program before. So setting realistic goals, but not making them too easy or too tough to reach, uh, is a good way to measure, and also motivate teams to think of new ways, think of better ways to improve those processes, whether it be through just straight analytics, or improving other processes around analytics that could then improve the business as a whole.
Nice. Now, just drilling into that a little bit further, can you give us some high level examples of ways that you can improve processes around, say, and when we say analytics, we're really talking about creating reporting dashboards, right? Discovering insights that maybe historically were just someone was were just estimations. So what are some nice examples that are relevant to improving processes?
So I'll talk to two, and the first one I'm going to talk to is design thinking, and I really picked up on this in some of my consulting work. And what design thinking is all about is understanding the stakeholders' problems and not asking them what they want to see, right? Understand thinking of everything as a business problem with business questions and how we can solve those business problems and answer those business questions through data and storytelling. So don't say, what metrics do you want to see on this dashboard? Ask, what are your business problems? What are your pain points? And then understanding those and working together to craft those questions to then answer those, to then help solve those business problems.
Okay,
So,
nice. Yeah,
so, so it's
to dive into that concept a little bit more, because I think that's something quite
so
unique.
so it requires a lot of back and forth with the key stakeholders, right? I can't tell you how many times someone came to me and asked, "Oh, can I have this metric in my report?" Where that metric is either not valid or irrelevant to what they're trying to look for. And this example I'll use because I've used it a million times. With Marriott, a lot of times people ask for, on the digital side, how much time do people spend on the Marriott website? And they want to see this in a report. And my question back to them is, why do you want to see that? What are you trying to get at? What is the business question you're trying to answer with that data? And they really can't answer that question because there is no valid answer. Because if there is, does the if the customer spends more, I say, okay, then if they give me an answer, I said, is more time spent on the site better or is less time spent on the site better? Because more time can mean someone's really carefully crafting a travel experience, but it could also mean they can't find what they want. Less time can mean they didn't see what they wanted and they left, or it can mean they found what they wanted immediately and then they left, right? If you're a site like YouTube, where more time spent on the site means more engagement with the content and more consumption of advertising, and it time spent on site has a direct correlation to revenue and engagement, then have average time spent on site on a dashboard that's conveying information around that. But for a site like Marriott, there's no clear-cut answer. So it's really understanding, okay, are you trying to understand the customer engagement? Are you trying to understand, given they get to a booking funnel, how long does it take people to go from initial to end of their booking funnel or something like that? And we can get a little bit more nuanced and be a little bit more direct with their uh, answers. But it's really understanding what they're trying to see. If it's engagement, we can show different things around engagement rates, or if it's conversion, we can see things about conversion rates, or if it's um, revenue, we can show average revenue from different splits of the data. But really trying to understand what those underlying pain points are and how that information, as it will be presented to these stakeholders, and who are not necessarily on the analytics side, they're much more on the business side, and potentially from these stakeholders to their potential leadership, you want to make sure that nothing is lost in translation. So you want to be as clear as possible, but you also don't want to have information on there that's just going to lead to more questions that are just not necessarily even whether they're valid or even necessary. It's just going to lead to more confusion from the leadership folks.
I love that. I love that, and that is something that I've actually touched upon uh, a couple of times in past episodes on the podcast. In that, a lot of and a lot of it comes down to creativity, right? And if you can, and I think this is sort of along the same lines as your design thinking, is that you can be like an artist with your analytics. Like you can, if you can be creative, you can actually drill deeper into these questions, deeper into this data, and showcase what is relevant versus what is irrelevant. And that is something that I think was very difficult in the past. Everyone just used to settle on these surface level metrics, But these days, you can really get a lot more nuanced, as you've exampled. And I think that is a big part about um, showcasing more value in what you're actually doing, and also, setting yourself apart in a lot of cases, like yourself personally, or even as a business. If you can really dive into these more nuanced metrics, that's how you're going to beat the competition. That's how you're going to generate the real value for your organization.
And I would take it another like mantra that I've said for a while in my business is simple is complex, right? Getting a simple answer, how is this business doing? Or if we're grading different business lines, A, B, or C, right? It's a simple answer. What's the grade here? But getting to that and finding a way to convey that very easily and clearly and concisely is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. So there's a lot of back end work that goes into just bringing that data all together. There's a lot of engineering work that just goes into figuring out how to best present that, right? So you have the data side of bringing the data together to come up with an answer, and then you have the artistic side where you're trying to, okay, how do we tell this story in a way that's compelling, that'll not only get people to look at it, but get people to understand it and act on it. Um, someone uh, someone once told me that analytics without change is just data, right? And
Mm.
sometimes the change may be to keep doing what we're doing, right? If we're looking at the business, should we invest or should we divest? Sometimes it's just let's hold, let's keep things as they are. But as you have to look at everything as a decision, and and the reason you invest in analytics is to make better, quicker, more informed decisions to ultimately improve the business or generate some sort of value.
Mm.
So, and then quantifying, as we were speaking earlier, how we quantify that value then can be taken to um, the leadership and say, okay, we saved the business $75 million by implementing these sorts of changes. By facilitating, by improving our customer experience is worth this much to uh, the business in terms of real dollars or in terms of approximate real dollars, right? You
Mm.
can say, okay, we do now, like if you're talking about say e-commerce, right, where you're talking, if we improve the checkout, right, how much would how much revenue can you potentially gain by cutting out a step from a checkout in e-commerce analytics, right? Looking at various different pieces in there. Um, looking at search analytics, right? How much of an improvement can we see by making a search box bigger or smaller, by changing the color of a button? It's all about testing and showing here's what we get right now, and here's the potential improvement we get by making this change.
Mhm. Yeah, nice. Now, what I would like to just go to next is a bit more, because you've had a diverse amount of experience, and now I presume you're working, in sort of a consulting capacity. One of the great things about that is that you get to generally work across a few different customers, and you see a lot of different problems. What I think would be great is to understand a little bit more about your technology stack. So how are you actually building, well, what are your go-to pieces of technology to build some of the solutions that you feel can add value in this space?
So I would say I have probably had the most experience with Tableau. That's just because back in about 10 or 11 years ago, my organization, we were using some older technologies like business objects, and we were sending out a lot of reports, right? You had analysts emailing reports on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and we wanted to bring things more self-service. So we invested in Tableau, and the leadership invested in a few of us going to the Tableau conference that year. Then, come a year later, I was speaking at that conference talking about how our team had transformed our analytics within a year, right? How we changed from a push model where we were sending out reports to more self-service pull model where folks can go in and get what they need, and talking about the different value that folks were getting from the analytics that we built. I would then say, so throughout that organization and then the following organizations, I would say Tableau has been the tool of choice for many of them. But I've also used Power BI, Click, ThoughtSpot, and each one has their pros and cons. Certain limitations within each tool, right? If you're looking at more of those quick ad hoc analytics or certain types of data integrations, you might want to use a tool like a ThoughtSpot. But if you're looking for more of, if you're very familiar with the Microsoft stack and you have Microsoft everything, I've seen a lot of clients like to say, okay, we're on O365, we have here, and then we'll use Power BI because a lot of folks are very familiar with Excel. And the way you code in Power BI is very similar to the way you code in Excel. And 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 I think the benefit of these sort of competition is, and you get new players in the market like Sisense and Looker uh, and Spotfire. You have other players in the market, and that only makes each tool better because each tool is able to say, okay, this is what we're lacking, or here's another offer that we can have in order to improve for the masses. So, right,
Nice.
it's kind of almost um, spun a quick turnaround time with new features being added on basically a quarterly basis with each of these tools, which is great. And then you got to just make sure you're up to date with the proper software and you're able to implement those sorts of changes or and get value out of those updates.
Yeah, nice. I think personally, from my perspective, yeah, I think um, there is so many options now, and they all have their pros and cons. I do kind of see that the bigger players like Power BI and Tableau, I think they seem to be more complete. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you were to sort of stack them next to each other, they have all of the analytics features, but maybe all of the sort of enterprise features that you need, like
Yep.
security and governance and all that kind of thing. They've really built those in a bit more comprehensively. So there's some benefits there. Um, but
I would agree.
yeah. Sorry, you go.
No, I would say I would agree on that, and because they're, again, you have two giant companies behind it. I mean, now Tableau is behind with Salesforce, and Power BI's got Microsoft. I mean, two of the largest companies in the world are backing them. And I would also say that from an analytics perspective, it comes down to the storytelling, and you can tell great stories with either tool. And analysts, if you know one of those tools, you should be able to use all of those tools. And
Mm,
from a marketing perspective, if you are an analyst, one thing I would recommend is not marketing yourself per se as tool specific, but say you're a data visualization professional, not
mm,
I'm a Power BI professional, or I'm a Power BI person, or I'm a Tableau person, or I'm a Click person, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, by marketing yourself as a data visualization professional, um, it really opens up a lot more doors and enables you to be more fungible in the types of work and projects you see or you seek, as well as um, it's just a good thing to know in terms of learning.
Mm.
And,
Yeah,
and
I
and
agree.
knowing what's
Yeah.
there in the space, so you can speak to different things, right? If you're at an organization that maybe has Power BI and you see certain things that may be lacking, but you know Tableau has those capabilities, or vice versa, you can say, okay, we're trying to do this, and this tool doesn't have that capability, but this other tool does, and we're able to then maybe go into that tool, or right, or even not one of those tools, right? If we're trying to do this, but ThoughtSpot has this, or Click has this, or we have Click, but Power BI has this, here's what we can do, and here's how we
Mm.
can work together. And here are certain tools that I think, or as an analyst saying, here's certain tools that I think that we can use to achieve our goals
Mhm.
so that we can build the proper story around the data and the questions that we've been asked.
Yeah, that's a really common theme that has come through in so many discussions I've had recently, is that, all of us in this space recognize how many opportunities there are to produce quality work in various different industries or business functions. And I think that flows in nicely to say, if you're an expert in this field and you want to do some consulting, well, you can actually attack it from multiple different angles. You don't need to be specifically about just one technology. You could say that you're a data storyteller, or you're a data visualization expert, like you've mentioned. But also, I think you can come at it from, say, you're an analytics expert in the logistics area, you're an analytics expert in the e-commerce area. There's so many different ways that you can attack things, and it doesn't just have to be about this specific technology or this specific platform. If you can build a expertise and a niche offering in any different area, if you attack it from any different angle, like there's so much opportunity for you.
Yeah, and you have that sort of portfolio, right?
Yeah.
Whether it be like, right, if you're e-commerce, right, you say, okay, I've worked with these particular clients or these particular organizations or where I've worked. But the other thing is, you can also go cross industry or cross functional, because yes, if you're e-commerce, you're very familiar with the e-commerce metrics and terminology, but analytics is still analytics and storytelling is still storytelling. And if you know how to tell a story on e-commerce data, you can tell that same story with healthcare data. It's just different metrics that you're talking about and different pieces that you're analyzing. So
Mhm.
I do believe that, yes, it is definitely beneficial when you have, uh, say, a particular niche or logistics or finance or whatever it may be. But I also think that it keeps a lot of doors open if you do have that wide range and say, okay, I'm an analytics expert, and because I know how to tell stories, and because I know what metrics to look at and how to implement things like the design thinking methodology that I was describing earlier, and ask the right questions and understand the right business problems, I can tell a story with finance data, healthcare data, e-commerce data, logistics data, you name it. And here are different types of examples of things that I've done. And you might see uh, return on investment on e-commerce data, but you might see number of COVID vaccinations on healthcare data or something like that, or potential reach of a particular community or particular for the disease, right? I mean, there's a
Mm.
lot of COVID uh, dashboards that are going up. I remember a few years ago, um, there was a lot of talk around the opioid crisis in the US and people
Mm.
building dashboards around data from there and looking at that from all sorts of different perspectives, right? Looking at it from a justice and criminology perspective, looking at it from a healthcare perspective, and looking at it from a remediation perspective.
Mm.
You can and even from like a national security and things like drug trafficking perspective. So
Mhm.
you can
Mhm.
look at things um, all different ways. It really comes down to having that clear question and having that and I would go even further, having that clear question and having that clear audience, right? Because your audience isn't always the same. And building a dashboard for an executive isn't the same thing as building an operational dashboard for um, someone in middle management who needs to be monitoring a particular line of business or a particular category or subcategory of a business.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that sticks out to me when you go through all those examples is just the versatility of the analytics tools these days. Like, you, even though I think there is some benefits to specialization in some ways, like
Mm-hmm.
if you're if you're trying to sell your services, sometimes there's some benefits there. But in saying that, these tools, like Tableau and Power BI, it's just data at the end of the day. Like, you can curate insights across data coming from anything with these tools, and it's just about having the right conceptual thinking around what your consumers want to see, or what is going to generate the most value, I think. And I think your design thinking methodology is really quite focused around that. Now, Brent, just as we round off our discussion, I want to just dive into one or two other things. One of the things I think would be beneficial, just with your experience, is what are some really relevant opportunities you see in this space right now that you think that others could take advantage of? It could be like on a more personal level, or it just could be from a organized, like a business level.
What are some
I
real
mean, I mean,
opportunities?
the opportunities that I see are really around that first thing that I mentioned earlier in terms of the culture, right? How do you shift that culture and generate that buy-in? And sometimes it takes getting one person bought in or finding that it really takes finding that right person and having that person be a champion and really understanding what needs to be done and who are the other right people to talk to, and then it starts to permeate throughout the organization. And how do we cut down certain barriers? How do we improve those processes? Finding those right people to really drive the change. I see that as one of the biggest obstacles, but also one of the biggest opportunities within organizations, where you have processes that are in place that are detracting from getting them or from the final mission or the final analysis that we're trying to complete, and or the organizational change that you're trying to implement, or this new technology that we're considering bringing on because it has the potential to improve the business tenfold in whatever metric you may be looking at. And others may be either dragging their feet or not necessarily as enthused, or trying to understand why you may be excited about this. So it's really finding those champions, those who are really motivated to drive that change, and building that culture, that community, and have them be the change, right? If you see opportunity and you have a few others on your group or your team or on other teams where you see potentials for um, joining together to really drive change, I say the biggest thing uh, is culture, because you can always upskill by taking courses or sitting down next to someone who may have Python skills where your Python skills might not be as good, or someone who has Tableau where your Tableau might not be as good, or Power BI, whatever it may be, whether it's coding, whether it's visualization, what have you. Those are things that can all be taught. Technology can be bought,
Mhm.
but or licensed or open source. But culture is really something that really needs to be driven, and
Mhm.
and I see that as probably the biggest opportunity as well as the biggest challenge these days.
Yeah, that's a nice one. I like it. Now, so okay, and just on that, what do you think are like one or two of the best things to do to get the quickest impact around data culture?
Show tangible results, right? And
Mm-hmm.
quantify, right? If you say, okay, if you say that we're going to do this, quantify, even if it's something that's not quantifiable, find a way to quantify it. Like I said earlier, if it takes six people 6 weeks to do a particular process, and by implementing this or a new way of doing it, it cuts it down to 3 weeks. How much money is saved by those 6 people in 3 weeks that they would have been doing that process, doing something else, and say, okay, these people, let's just say average salary is say $100,000 a person. So 6 people times 3 weeks at 100,000 equals X amount of dollars. That's how much money we save by doing that. That could then be going towards improving other areas of the business, or
No.
as well as, and then the other thing is, as people see these results, they become, I've seen on the teams that I've led and I've worked on, they've, as people see the impact of their work, they become more engaged with the organization. They have a higher chance of being of retention. You have a higher employee satisfaction. You and people are generally happier and produce in the long run better work and are more loyal and more invested in the organization. So
Mm.
I see that as like a win-win-win. You win for the company, a win for the people, and almost like a win for the culture.
Yeah, I really like that. I love, you know, in the last few years, I think this concept of agile has become, you know, a lot more popular. I mean, there's this whole agile methodology, but I just look at it in a simpler way. I just think like getting solid proof of concepts out there done as quickly as possible, quick wins. You know, this is how you can really start getting the snowball effect around a data culture. And I think that that's kind of what you've alluded to, around, you know, create something tangible and that shows the value as quickly as possible. And I think that you can do that now. Like, you don't have to go and make some huge investment in some, you know, technology, one piece of technology that does everything. You can grab one of these modular technologies, whether it be, you know, even just like a data cleaning tool or like a data visualization tool, you know, and you can create for a relatively low cost quite a bit of value quite quickly. And that, I think, is a real, you know, one of the key things to really driving a culture shift.
And I would also go just say from an analytics standpoint, you don't need to build a complex model in order to generate value from analytics, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you build a model with 30 inputs that's 95% accurate versus a model with 3 inputs that's 80 to 90% accurate, right? The marginal return of those extra 27 inputs might be very small, but that simpler model can provide enough direction to say, okay, we're going to invest here. We're going to allocate our investments this way or this way, or right, and make those sorts of directional decisions while you're performing, or while you're still working in that agile environment, and you can still consistently monitor how the business is doing and say, okay, now that we have a little bit more data and we can strengthen that model, we can now make a even bigger decision and say, okay, do we want to throw a little bit more money or do we want to hold back, right? And continuously looking at things from that sort of perspective is, I think, very beneficial to the business, because you don't have to be
Yeah.
perfect in order to be, or even you need to be in the right direction, but you don't need to be perfect in order to be uh, beneficial to the business.
Like it,
If you're
like it.
building a bridge, you want to make sure it's perfect because you don't want, because people could die, right?
Yeah.
If a bridge bridge is not structured properly, you want to make sure the engineers are perfect in their calculations. But if you're building from a business case, from do we invest or do we divest? Do we go left or do we go right? Being 80% to 90% right, so you can make a directional decision a lot quicker rather than waiting till you have enough data to make a 95% confident decision or a 98% confident decision, could mean either a lot of lost opportunity for more revenue or a lot of additional lost revenue if something is in the going in the opposite direction.
Nice. Yeah, I love that point, and I love all those points you've made. Okay, well, I think we're sort of rounding off here. We've covered lots of great stuff today. Like I really like how we've simplified some of these frameworks around how you actually go about things. And I feel even in my own mind that some of these things have been simplified in a way that anyone could anyone in this space they're actionable. They're actionable for anyone to start implementing or start exploring more within their own environments. Before last opportunity here, what is there anything else unique that you think you've come across or that you're seeing that might be beneficial to the listeners of the podcast?
I mean, I think we covered a lot of it, but again,
Yeah.
I would stress a few things, right? Focus on value, right? And value is defined very differently by different people. So, right, focus on value and quantify as much as you can, even when things aren't necessarily quantifiable.
Yeah, I really
so
like that.
so that's one. That's one thing that I see. I would say not often enough, right? If especially on that process improvement side, where things can fall by the wayside for initiatives that are direct revenue impacting or cost impacting decisions. So value is definitely something that would be strong. And again, I'll stress it again, is culture. Ask those questions, build those relationships so that you not only provide them with the information that they need, not necessarily what they're asking for, but the information that they need, but you build that trust between you as an analyst or the analytics department and them as the stakeholder or client or business leader who you're providing the information to. Because in building those relationships and providing them great analyses, you're able to build that trust so that they know to come back to you and they don't have to ask additional questions, or they know that when they get data from your department or from that has your stamp of approval, they know that they're getting something that's quality and something that can help them ultimately improve the value of their business through one of those three things: cost, revenue, or efficiency.
Love it. Value and culture. Those are some, the value generation and culture. I think those are some of my two, probably the two key takeaways for me around the discussion today. Okay, Brent, let's wrap it up. Thanks so much for your time today. A lot of great insights, a lot of value, I think, created on this episode. So, really appreciate your time. And to everyone who's listening, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. We're out on all your favorite podcast listening apps. And watch out for new episodes coming soon. Again, Brett, really appreciate your time today. Some really, really thoughtful insights and a really useful discussion. So thanks again.
Thank you. And yeah, anybody who wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect and chat and answer any questions you may have.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone. See you later.